Hello, and welcome to another episode of Wildwoman podcast. And today I'm delighted to have Ana Isabel, who you might recognize if you've been watching, who was on with me as a guest only a month ago, I think. And she's back due to popular demand. And as well as talking about a topic that extends from our earlier discussion around when I asked her the question about what it meant to her to be a wild woman. And Ana very beautifully and really profoundly sort of delved into what it means to her and to be free and free to be the best that we can be. And the conversation went in a lot of directions. But today we just want to focus on freedom of thought. And Ana, as a clinical hypnotherapist as well, would have a lot of experience working with people individually and also collectively. So just at the time we are on the planet right now, it seems to be quite an important topic for us to discuss and open up and share with people and explore. So Ana, welcome back to the program, to the podcast. Lovely to have you.
What an honor. Thank you so much for having me back. And yes, I am an analytical hypnotherapist. Some people would say clinical hypnotherapist. It basically means that I use hypnosis to help people to overcome all sorts of issues, from anxiety to phobias to anger, addiction, whatever can go wrong trauma wise, then that is my job, is to help people to get through that. And so I have I suppose, a frontline seat into the workings of the mind. And I think, when we were last talking and you asked me about what it means to be a wild woman, and I said it's about being free to be what we can be and to be the best that we can be. I went on to begin to describe what stands in the way. And I think it's a really important question. So what stands in the way of us being free to be the best that we can be? And in order to do that, I think we need to kind of unpick a little bit the influences around us. It used to be thought that children were, the expression was tabla rasa, which means a clean slate. And I think to a certain extent, that's still there, that belief that, a child is a clean slate, and therefore we must educate them. Some people would say indoctrinate them into the way of being that we as parents or educators or society as a whole wants them to be. And so that attitude, I think, is also very consistent, or it goes with the idea that our brains are programmable. So there's a lot of program language that's used when we're talking about the human mind. And I have become extremely wary of those analogies that people use when they're talking about the mind being programmable, etc. And the reason is we're not computers. We are flesh and blood. And we are not clean slates. We are also individuals. However, in order for our individuality to develop and thrive, we need to understand what makes us as human beings tick. And so one of those things is influence from those on whom we depend, and those on whom we depend first, of course, are our parents and our family. So this is a power relationship because we are totally dependent upon them. And in some respects, of course, that's quite normal. You know, we need our parents. So right away, we have, as parents, a responsibility to keep our children safe and to help them to be socialized into society and to a certain extent be likable, because they have to be able to get on with other people, whilst at the same time nurturing their rights to be an individual. So that's parents. Schools used to regard their job as being to teach children certain subjects, and also they were part of the process of socializing children into society. So you see, these are extremely influential. And the kind of relationship we have with our parents and the kind of relationship that we have with our teachers creates a template very early on for how we are going to respond to authority. Are we going to regard authority with some suspicion? Are we going to be even-handed in the way that we look at authority and think, well, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong? Are we going to hate authority altogether, or are we going to say, oh yes, they're always right because they know everything and I know nothing? And so that relationship determines quite a lot about how we then engage as adults with other people. And that can make us extremely vulnerable to manipulation, because if we have been undermined in our self-belief and we have been conditioned to think that we don't really know very much, actually, we are much less likely to be asking questions. And that vulnerability means that we can engage in all kinds of relationships in which we might be abused. So this, of course, could be personal relationships. It could be that friends take advantage of us. It could be that employers take advantage of us. Of course, it could also mean that we could be in situations, if we are unfortunate enough, in which we don't understand when governments are taking advantage of us. So this is a really important thing. The other thing that really has an impact on us is our peers. So we go from looking at our parents and our teachers and authority and wanting very much to please them into that adolescent stage, when actually we need to pull away to find out who we are. So we need to at least to some extent reject our parents, reject our teachers, and engage with our peers, because we need to find out who we are. And that's because we've been told who we are. You are this, and this is what's expected of you. And you get to maybe around 12, 13, and every parent will recognize this, and heaven knows that if you've got a good memory, you might remember that yourself, where you just go, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do this. And I want to hang out with my friends. It's a normal stage of development. And again, how that's handled by parents is going to have repercussions for everything else. But equally, we look to our peers. We're social. We're very social. And we look to our peers for approval and for validation. So when, as a hypnotherapist, I am working not to reprogram a person, but to help them to understand how they came to develop certain beliefs, we go back to early experiences, and then bring in a fresh perspective. Because what happens is we have what are called sensitizing events when we're young, which then predispose us to look at the world in a particular way. And we get stuck in time. So,
but a traumatic event, sorry, Anna, do you mean like a trauma when you're saying a sensitizing event?
So
okay.
I'm using the term, it's a sensitizing event, because trauma comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And people think of trauma as being big things, but it might not be. It might just be something that your mother said to you, which had an impact that she did not anticipate. You know, it's the law of unintended consequences. She says something because she wants you to do one thing, and you interpret it as something else, and suddenly it's huge and it's stuck there imprinted. You may have forgotten, but nevertheless, it's a big thing. So this is why I refer to it as a sensitizing event, because it's traumatic for you, but it's not necessarily the big traumas which people might associate with the word trauma. Of course, that could be part of it too. So you have your initial sensitizing event, and then what happens is that you begin to look for confirmation, because what you do as a child is you're trying to work out the rules of the game. If I do this, what will happen? If I do that, what will happen? So you're constantly, as a child, we're constantly as children wanting to adapt so that we can avoid punishment, we can avoid pain. So we have that sensitizing event, we formulate a theory as to how the world works, and then we begin to interpret subsequent events along through that filter. So things are going to very often happen which confirm that theory. This is how we develop a bias. This is that perception. So when I'm working with clients, we're going back to understand where that comes from. Where does this belief that I have about myself come from, about the world come from? So let's go back, because the reason I'm sitting here in this chair asking for help is because whatever that is that's causing this is no longer serving me. It's now become a destructive behavior, or it's trapping me in fear, or whatever it is. So we go back, and this time, because we are in a state of using hypnotherapy, and when we are in a both relaxed and alert state, we are better able to make connections in our minds. So this is not reprogramming. It's not even retraining. What it is us working together and allowing your adult self to come in with a different perspective, so that we can bring new understanding to what happened, and therefore you will modify the behavior. And notice how careful I'm being about saying you will modify your behavior, because nobody who has your best interest at heart should be looking to modify your behavior for you. Nobody. That is an infringement of your mind. And so I'm very, very careful, particularly because with hypnosis, people this is their thing, is that it's all about mind control. Oh, no. It seriously isn't. Mind control happens in the most subtle ways. It happens when you are watching TV and enjoying a program, and the ads come in with, and I am going to use the words here, social programming. Any agenda that is wanting to be, how can I put this, promoted, whether you like it or not, is going to be put into those adverts or into the storylines of those soaps that you're watching. It will be subtle because your mind cannot easily be controlled. So one of the questions when I was training as a hypnotherapist that was asked was, can you get somebody to commit murder? Yes and no. No, because actually your brain, your mind has its own defenses and a strong sense of what's right or wrong. Can you be manipulated into doing something? Yes, you can. Something that you might not believe was right. Yes, you can. So what are those conditions? So those conditions are preying on, and I'm using the word preying as P-R-E-Y. They are preying on the way that the mind works. So in the same way that I'm using hypnosis to help my clients be independent and free, others will not necessarily be using hypnosis for that. In fact, hypnosis is possibly not one of the best tools for that. There are far more subtle and effective ways because it takes time. So that level of manipulation takes time. So the reason I mentioned TV is because television and film, the frames per second put you into a hypnotic state. Something to do with, as the frames are moving in front of your eyes, you are in already, and you don't know it, but you are in a at least semi-hypnotic state. It depends on how engaged you are with the program.
Can you describe, can you describe a hypnotic state for someone who maybe hasn't been through, because we see a lot on, people being hypnotized, going up on stage and doing all these crazy things. So just where you said it's sort of a relax, can you describe when you're working with someone, what is that state?
You experience this when you go into a daydream. When you go into a daydream, you are in a hypnotic state. Okay. So you just don't know it. It's natural. The reason that this works is because it's natural. It's natural for us to daydream, for our minds to wander. That is natural. When we're meditating, that's the brain waves that are there when we're meditating are very similar to those that we experience when we're in hypnosis. The mind is relaxed but alert. It's different to being asleep. Now, some people can go into it more deeply than others. Others struggle because it's hard for them to relax. But we are all vulnerable to this. And the more invulnerable we believe that we are, the more vulnerable we become. So I'm going to say that again. The more invulnerable we believe that we are, the more vulnerable we become, because we're not looking out for it. And so the mechanisms, if you think about abusive relationships, one of the things that we often see is how the individual who is in control or abusing power isolates the other person. Cults operate in this way. Timeshares. Do you remember, a few years back when there were these timeshare seminars that people used to go off to because they were curious, and basically they'd be there for the entire weekend, not really allowed to talk to anybody, and constant pressure until they sign on the dotted line. That is classic. You see, you're not using hypnosis, you're using pressure tactics. And you can see those same tactics being used in all sorts of different circumstances. I recently heard about councils or counselors going off for training in environmental awareness, where they're going in for weekend training, not knowing that they're not going to be allowed to speak to anybody, to their colleagues who are there whilst they are there. And I'm thinking, that's very strange. Why would you not allow people to speak to each other? And see, always you have to ask, the minute somebody is being isolated deliberately by somebody else, you have to ask why. And so working with people who are victims of domestic abuse, who've been in very abusive relationships, the pattern always is, I control you by controlling your ability to speak to other people. Now the only voice you're hearing is mine. The only voice you're hearing is mine. And I am going to make you feel that big, because what I want to do is I want to deconstruct you. Now, people are not necessarily plotting this out. Part of being human is that we kind of know how to do this. It's quite different when behaviorists who have studied this are advising people in power on how to do this in order to get a certain behavior out of the population. And that is happening. So, and there's evidence of that all over. So we need to understand that in abusive relationships, number one, isolate. Number two, you demean the person. You make them doubt themselves. I mean, there's that famous film, Gaslight, which of course is where that term gaslighting comes from, where that's exactly what happens. I remember I watched that film when I was about 16. I remember it to this day.
Me too.
It was chilling. Yeah. I doubt, and I don't know many people have seen it. You know, there's the term is around, people don't realize where it comes from. Extraordinary film. And I remember watching it at about the age of 16 and thinking, oh, wow. Is that possible? But yes, she was.
When did this start? Sorry. So these tactics, Anna, like when do you think, when did these all emerge or start to, you know, where's their origin, like in terms of what you're saying there, you know, isolating people? Another aspect seems to be like repetition. You keep saying, when you talked about the programming on television, we keep hearing the same thing over and over.
The same message being bombarded. I think it's always been there, Celine. I think it's just human nature. You know, I'm a human being, you're a human being, which means I know what causes me pain. I know what I'm afraid of, which means I know what causes you pain and what you're afraid of. And I think it's just the minute we are aware of what hurts us, we're aware of what hurts the other. And so I think you can see this, you can hear it, you know, with people who've had abusive parents, whether it's physical abuse or whether it's emotional abuse. What is happening is that the child is demeaned. And the more demeaned we are as children, the more vulnerable we are as adults, because we can't stand on our own sovereignty. We can't be confident because we don't know who we are. So this is why it's so important, you know, when we're talking about freedom, is to free our minds from anything that demeans us. And in fact, I mean, if we're looking at the messages that are coming to the public now, it's all about how bad we are. Constantly, we are hearing that we are destroying the world, that there's too many of us, that actually, really, the world would be better off without us. Constantly.
It seems to have accelerated, sorry, hasn't it? It seems to, for any of us that may be sort of alert to this or sensing or picking up on it, maybe because of our own personal experiences, I don't know, but there seems to be a sort of a pace that's sort of picked up.
It's intensified. So what has happened is, I remember, it probably goes back further, but certainly in the 90s, when the environmental movement began, and keeping in mind that I am your classic conservationist, I absolutely love the world that we live in with a passion, and I am deeply connected to nature. So I was very aware of the movement at the time. And of course, there are absolutely massive issues that we need to sort out, environmental issues. But that doesn't mean that they're the ones that we're being told that are there. We have to ask, if you are telling us to do these things, which really amount to being anti-human, you'd better have some pretty sound evidence that isn't because you have vested interests in this technology, which, by the way, could be environmentally destructive too. So let's have an honest conversation about this. But coming back to what you were saying, so I think it begins to be much more noticeable there, because there is a truth here. We have environmental issues. The ozone layer was in trouble, and I believe has since, been improved or repaired, which is fantastic. We ought to be seeing that nice and loud, because it was the actions that we took as human beings that solved it. And that's where the hope lies. So instead of saying there's too many people, and who are we to determine that there are too many people in the world? It's not sustainable. Well, how about we use our amazing creativity to solve the problem, instead of saying to people that actually they don't belong on this planet because they're just destructive. No, actually, the majority of people are not destructive. They are just wanting to live their lives according to the means that they have been given by the technologies that are available, which in many instances they were told were wonderful. They've bought into it, and now they're being told that it's all their fault. Excuse me. We have a collective responsibility, yes, but we have a collective responsibility to work out collectively how to solve this.
There's the difference, isn't it? Yeah.
And the reason I'm stressing this is because it's the language of blame being placed upon people, which is completely and utterly abusive of their dignity as human beings. So we are being told we're basically naughty, awful children who don't really have the right to exist and be here. And by the way, shut up, because nobody wants to hear what you have to say. It's the whole thing about children being seen and not heard. Well, you don't particularly want to see human beings now, let alone hear them, even less hear them. So there's that language. There's, you're a racist, you're far right, you're this, you're that. Or maybe you're far left, or, there's all, you're always something. It's divisive language. And it is damning language. So I think that's why I have an issue with this, is because it is damning language, and is damning language which is undermining every individual's right to exist. So can we stop that, please? And actually just start having adult discussions about how we can live together in harmony and peace.
Yeah. A question just there to stop you for a moment. Just, yeah, that's what strikes me in all of that. And I can say, yes, hand on heart when I'm listening to you. But why is it that there seems to be just a certain group of people that are sort of recognizing that, okay, there's something telling me this is not okay, you know?
This comes back to what we are prepared to believe about ourselves. So if I have a client who comes to me and really has a self-loathing, and we go back to an incident when they're young, when they're being told that they are hideous, whatever, very often what happens is that if I want to get the adult self to talk to the child self and counter what's being said to the child, the adult actually agrees with the abusive words that were being used against the child. And I have to work to help them to see actually that there's another perspective to this, that the child's not awful and bad, that there might be a reason why the child did what they did. What might that be? So that we can actually start changing the voice that the adult self is using with the child. And that's crucial because it's that adult voice agreeing with the destructive messages that were being given to the child by parents, teachers, peers, whatever, that has made that person hate who they are. And therefore, when people in authority or their peers or anybody else gives them that message, they go, yeah, of course. That's, yeah, sorry. Yeah. That's right. I get why you hate me. So this is, yeah, it is very important that we understand how we are speaking to ourselves. The voice we use to speak to ourselves determines whether or not we're going to accept somebody using an abusive voice to us.
Okay.
And
so sorry, just to pick when it's just when you say that, that makes me think then, okay, would it then, could you from that say, well, then a common theme must be that people who have done some work maybe to on their own sensitizing experiences or different things that have happened to them to undo that voice, that are more likely to be aware of the importance of freedom of thought, and that we're not being given that.
Really,
like,
what we're talking about is resilience.
Yeah.
So this is really what we're talking about is resilience, because we have to have some resilience to be able to take an abusive boss, or, you know, and I want to make a distinction here that sometimes we think we're being resilient when we're just being defensive.
Okay, so explain the difference there then. Okay.
The difference here is, and we've all met them, people who are really prickly and who are very quick to take offense and who are going to interpret the slightest thing as an attack. So there's lots of people like that around too. But the thing is, they're still believing the negative messages they're being told. It's just that they are, instead of going, it's like an adaptation. You know, it's instead of going, oh yes, of course I believe it. It's how dare you? How dare you? It's that immediate indignation. And very often overreacting. And they are vulnerable too, because they can be whipped up into outrage and indignation very easily.
Mm.
So they're not as free as they think, because they think that they're being really, assertive, when actually they're being defensive. You see, they're still on that back foot. And what we want as individuals is to hear the abuse, recognize it, and go, really? That's what you think, is it?
Mm. So how do we get to that?
We need to understand where our vulnerabilities are as human beings, and we need to understand where our individual vulnerabilities are too, because we all have them. And it's by being aware of what it is that we're afraid of and why we respond the way we respond that we can begin to understand when someone is being manipulative, and say, do you know what? No, thank you. And there's another pitfall. If we haven't got enough, sometimes we think someone's being manipulative purely because we're uncomfortable with their feelings. I don't like you crying. I don't like you crying because it makes me feel bad. Therefore, when you cry, it can't be a genuine response to something. It's you deliberately wanting to make me feel guilty. So we have to tease out that too.
Yeah, that seems that's sort of nearly a projection, really, isn't it? Of sort
Exactly.
of, because it's bringing you back into something that I don't want to feel.
Exactly.
And
So we have to remember as human beings that as we are relating to each other, the reason it's a minefield and the reason that relationships are so challenging, relationships of all kinds, is because we're trying to see through our own filters. We can only see things through our own filters. We haven't got any others. So the real road to enlightenment is to question our reactions, not in a derogatory or self-admonishing way, but just to observe and say, that's elicited quite a strong reaction from me. I get why, because it wasn't a very pleasant thing, but it's still a very strong emotion. I wonder where it's rooted. Where's it coming?
That takes a certain amount of maturity, I suppose, doesn't it, to get to that
place? Maturity, but I think also self-honesty and courage. I always feel such admiration for every single one of my clients. I am full of admiration for them, because, and they find it hard to believe it when I tell them, but I am so full of admiration, because each session that we have together, the work that they do takes such courage, because they're having to face up to pain and fear that actually they've been avoiding forever. For years they've been avoiding it, and they've decided, no, I'm going to do this. It's so brave. It's really hard, because
so sorry, I didn't mean to, but is there it seems to me when you're saying that, and I can say it from my own life and other people I've met, that you almost have to hit, I suppose, your personal rock bottom, for want of a better word, or a collective rock bottom, before, and it's going to be different for each of us, before we start to take that, like you said, the bravery of like what made that person walk in the door, someone else might not. And collectively, we're in a place that is, to me, and I think to many people, quite scary, as we're witnessing this level of whipping up of just more hysteria and hate, like that something inside of us doesn't say, well, just somewhere in me always goes, if it's all about hate and separation, there's something wrong here. I don't care what anyone is saying to me, but this, I know enough from my own personal experiences and places I've been personally and emotionally that this is not an answer. It's never the answer.
And I think that the majority of people know that and feel it. They don't necessarily understand everything that's happening. I think very few of us do, but they understand enough to know what feels wrong. And I think that's a very important thing, because the majority of people feel that there's something deeply wrong, and it is not in it, and instinctively are not wanting to be divided. And the evidence for that is all around us, as I'm seeing more and more groups of people coming together to create assemblies, to create groups that are communities that are wanting to heal. So I think this is, again, we're looking at human nature. In fact, what we're discussing really is human nature. And as we tease out and understand the human mind, so that we can understand our vulnerabilities, what makes us vulnerable to manipulation of all kinds at all different levels, we also need to understand human nature and the beauty of it, the power of it. Nobody seems to be very keen on telling us repeatedly, you are so powerful. You have imagination. You have creativity and ingenuity. The thing is, you might just not know it yet. And there's very few people out there saying, I believe in you. And that's what we need. And that's why we're seeing these wonderful assemblies coming together. And groups, and it's happening all over the world. Groups coming together and saying, this doesn't feel right. It feels abusive. And actually, we want harmony. And I'm seeing amazing things happening all over, where people are really putting their minds to solving problems that are social problems. How do we create cohesion? How do we truly live in connection with each other, in respect with each other? How do we create alternatives to systems that entrap us? How do we do that? And there's amazing creative ideas all around us. That's us. That's us, human beings. This is the voice I have for every one of my clients. It's a very emotional thing, actually, when I think about it. Because when they are there in that child state and they can't stand up for themselves, my job is to help them learn how to do it. And I love that. So that they have their voice and that they can see and discover how amazing they are as human beings. That's my passion. And so if I have one wish for anyone watching this, is that each and every one of you understand how beautiful you are. That's my wish.
It's so beautiful, Anna. It's so beautiful. Thank you. And it sure, what I felt, I won't say thought, as you were speaking, and I think it's key to what we're talking about here when we talk about mind control, is that we are not just this rational mind, we, as you said, but we've been kept, it feels like to me that we're sort of kept up here all the time. And that once, and I'm sure this is when you work with people, I've experienced this in my life personally. Once I've been supported to come back into my body and that sort of intuitive sensing, empathic, that how we resonate, how we connect, then that is how we free ourselves, feels, because no one can take, that is our humanity, that is our individuality, it's our connection to each other, to our whatever, but it's to something greater. But if we're kept up here in this, and as you said, the isolation and up in our heads, we can be controlled. And my experience in people I've met is they're not, who are quite awake to a lot of this or are questioning what is happening in the world. They are quite, the only way I can describe it is they're quite embodied. Yes, they have their issues. It's not about a better or worse or anything like that, but there's something about being in that place that when you're speaking to me now, if you had spoken like this to me even 6-7 years ago, I don't know that I would have really felt it, because I was so cut off from who I am. And it's, been the greatest gift. I say cancer was my journey back to that, and it's been the greatest gift because I feel now. And I didn't feel. I didn't think, exactly as you described. So it's so beautiful. Like, is that a lot of when you're working with people is helping them come back to that place and sort of hold a space that it's to hear you, that they may not have been able to say to themselves or been able to go there on their own. So yeah,
we have the capacity to solve any problem. We are creative souls. We have a divine spark within us. And no one has the right to interfere with that. And we need to heal from all of the negative voices that we were exposed to as children, and learn the beauty of who we are. That's a journey, I think, that most of us have to undertake in some way. There are people who were lucky enough to have parents who helped them build resilience against this kind of thing. And of course, I get to see the ones who weren't so lucky, if I say that.
But ultimately they are, because
it's a journey. And the best thing, and if I can say anything else to the audience, it would be, if you are a parent, it's not about indulging your child, but nor is it about disciplining your child either. It's about helping your child see their strengths and gently show them their weaknesses. And I say gently, very lightly. You want to play on those strengths, and you want to just lightly say, oh yeah, you know what? Or don't say anything at all. Because I was going to say, you know what, next time let's try this. Because maybe you need a bit more practice. You can do that. Or you can, until they're confident enough for you to be able to do that, you can quietly orchestrate the opportunity for them to practice the things that they're weak at. And then when they're confident enough, then you can talk about it lightly. It's not about getting your child to think that they are perfect. A lot of parents do that, and that's not good either. It's not either. It's about helping your child feel safe when they go wrong, so that they know that love is unconditional. It's about helping them to understand there are boundaries, that they might be hurtful to other people without crushing them. That's the thing. It's just this, it's so hard, because every child's different, and parenting does not come with a manual, you know, it just doesn't. So if you are a parent, there's one thing that's guaranteed: you are going to mess up. That doesn't make you a bad parent, it just makes you human. What I'm talking about is being sensitive to that.
Yeah. Lovely. And can I ask, just to, it's a little bit of a shift, but I know some people might, well, I've felt, ask this, or, you know, when we talk about mind control and what we, you know, feel or senses, you know, showing up in the world, the why, because often people have said this, but why would anyone be doing, we, you know, I understand in individual relationships, because yes, there can be a need to control and my fears, but I think as well, it feels like that's a bigger block for most people, that okay,
you
fine.
That we can tackle this question in a number of different ways. It is exactly the same question that we ask when we are faced in the news with a story of a psychopath who's done something hideous. How could they do that? For most people, the psychology of psychopathy is completely incomprehensible. It's beyond our comprehension. It's like saying, how could there be evil? And yet the evidence that evil exists is all around us. Just think about history. And you have to remember that people who have sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies will always gravitate to positions of power. Always. By whatever means they have. Now, if they are in positions of power, which is just being a parent, or being a wife or a husband, they affect one person, or two or three people. But if they have the education, the means, the opportunity, they will gravitate to positions of power. And they rely on us not understanding and they rely on us wanting to be nice and reasonable. So that's your answer.
I think the not understanding.
There's no, just because we can't understand why somebody would want to torture someone and then cut them up in bits and put them and bury them in the garden or do whatever, just because we can't understand why they would want to do that does not mean it's not going to happen.
I think we can relate as well to, you know, abstract or someone on the news that we don't know. But what I've experienced or noticed is that often, you know, it's the man down the road. It's, you know, these are all people who are in our community and presenting very charmingly and very warm and very caring. This is, you know, it's not some abstract mass murderer in wherever. So yeah, but it's thank you, because I think that's an important point to make, and them relying on us not understanding.
We need to remember Hitler was deemed to be incredibly charming and quietly spoken as well, and a vegetarian, you know, very close to his dog. He was human. He wasn't a monster. Stalin was human. Mao Zedong was human. But something went very badly wrong. Something went very badly wrong. And so we have to always be aware of that. We have to be aware of that potential within ourselves, so that we work to always, as much as we can, be forgiving and understanding of ourselves and of others, be compassionate, I think, cultivating compassion. But at the same time, let's not be naive. Not everybody's like that. Let's not be naive. Let's not be paranoid either. We don't want to be paranoid, but we don't
So
we want to be so just understand that just because someone is, we say this to children, if somebody gives you sweets doesn't mean that you go with them. We tell them,
yeah.
we say that to children. Remember that ourselves, that not everyone is going to have our best interests at heart. So it's always worth asking questions. And maybe it's you, maybe it is you, maybe the other person's absolutely fine, and maybe you're just very sensitive. So when I say ask questions of yourself, ask questions of others. And if you're not sure, have a conversation.
Yeah. And ask questions. I think that's, if anything, needs to be a big wake-up call for people today, whether it's in a relationship or in the world. If you're being told you can't ask questions, I think we can all agree there's something very, very wrong. Thank you, Anna. You've really shed a lot of light for me, and I think for the audience, on this whole area of the mind and how it works and behavior, and what sort of informs how we can end up sometimes believing certain things. And it's not to be too hard on ourselves either, and to get and as you said, the brave people who come to you, if anyone is watching as well, I think where I often found it in my life, in relationships, not just in a bigger sense, was it can be quite difficult as well. Maybe there is something when you listen to this that you're going, oh yeah, God, I felt this. I know I have in my life. And you can feel your whole world is falling down around you because you've built your life on, maybe, but a lot of us have these systems. But there is another way. It's sorry, this is a mantra of mine these days. There is another way, as Anna said as well. When we find each other, there are plenty of people, and we meet and heart to heart and talk and share. This is how we heal, isn't it? We're not alone, and this is how we change the world.
Look around you.
There
will be groups around you that are doing wonderful things. If you want to participate, and if you want to create a community that is nourishing and positive, look around you. And if you can't find one, create one.
I love that. We'll leave it on those wise words. If you can't find one, create one.
I would say a lot of people doing that. So if you can't find one, create one. And I think maybe there might be a link in the description box that you can investigate for that.
Yeah. Anna I'll put all her details as well, because, for someone, you may want to work with her personally, individually, if something is coming up for you and it's the right time. You may want to reach out and connect with the community, like you said. And the same here. I'm finding that the moment I started to put my head above the parapet, I've just found the most wonderful people. And I'll just quote another astrologer like you, this line as well that has stayed with me, Pam Gregory. She says, don't look back at the collapsing scenery. And I just think, let's forge ahead and create together what we want to see, the type of world. So thank you so much, Anna. Until the trilogy part 3 next time. And everyone, thank you so much for watching. And as I said, I'll put all of Anna's details in the notes description box. Thank you, Anna, for your time.
Thank you.